Hi everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our two-part series on policy change, youth, and the 2013 International Conference on Family Planning. Today's webinar is Linking Policy to Youth, Sexual and Reproductive Health. My name is Kate Gillis. I'm a policy analyst here at the Population Reference Bureau, and I serve as PRB's youth focal person. We're going to start today's webinar by watching PRB's Engage presentation, The Time is Now, Invest in Sexual and Reproductive Health for Young People. We'll discuss how the key messages relate to the 2013 ICFP conference. Then we'll look at how the presentation can be used as a tool to support the elements of policy change that we identified in last week's webinar. Finally, we'll go over how you can use this and other Engage presentations as advocacy tools in your own work. So for those of you who are not able to join the last webinar, a recording is available to watch online. We'll include the link to that when we send the link to this webinar. There are a few logistics to note before we begin. First, since internet connectivity may not be strong enough to support clear audio for everyone, there won't be an audio portion during this webinar. You will be able to hear the presenter, but we won't be able to hear you. So if you'd like to submit a question, please use the questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. There will be a few points for questions during the webinar, and we'll wrap up with a final Q&A session at the end. If we're not able to get to your question during the webinar today, we'll do our best to respond by email afterwards. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please submit a question and we'll try to answer it immediately. My colleague, Taijen Tsai, is standing by to help you troubleshoot if need be. To begin with, I want to briefly explain what I mean when I say Engage presentation. PRB's Engage presentations are dynamic, multimedia presentations for policy communication about family planning and reproductive health issues. They are designed to engage high-level leaders in critical conversations about family planning, reproductive health, and development, and enable leaders at all levels to grasp the evidence base for investment in health as a key development strategy. Engage presentations are intended to be useful advocacy tools. They are available online, and we encourage people to download and use them as part of their own work. The particular presentation we're focusing on today, The Time is Now, Invest in Sexual and Reproductive Health for Young People, was developed with funding from the USAID Office of Population and Health through PRB's IDEA project, which stands for Informing Decision Makers to Act. The goal of The Time is Now is to improve the audience's understanding of the unique needs of youth, the importance of involving young people to achieve development goals, and ultimately to raise the profile of youth and their issues, especially sexual and reproductive health, on policy issue agendas in sub-Saharan Africa. The primary audience for this presentation is government policymakers in sub-Saharan Africa who are in a position to allocate resources and advance strategic investments on the policy agenda. Secondary audiences include all of those who influence high-level and government policymakers. That might include news media, civic and religious leaders, program officials, and other types of community and opinion leaders. This presentation is a tool that you can use to reach any of those audiences with messages about the needs of young people and the importance of investing in young people for national development. So one last note before I start the presentation. At the end of the video, we'll have a brief discussion about the key messages and how they relate to the theme of the ICFP, which is full access, full choice. Keep that in mind as you watch and be ready with ideas at the end. Okay, so on to the presentation. There will be a few moments of silence as I switch from my microphone to the video narration, so please just bear with us.
There are 883 million people living in sub-Saharan Africa today. 1 out of every 3 is between the ages of 10 and 24. That's 280 million young people. And they are playing a pivotal role in the growth and development of our families, communities, and nations. Today, more young people, especially girls, are completing primary education and enrolling in secondary school. They are leading the technology revolution and have greater access to means of communication and information than ever before. And our young people continue to show an interest in entrepreneurship and business ownership, a critical pillar for the continent's future economic growth. Our adolescent and youth population is of major significance in development in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, we have the fastest growing population of young people in the world. While this scenario may seem challenging, it is in fact an opportunity. Evidence from East Asia's economic miracle has taught us that when large numbers of young people grow up and enter the workforce, a special window opens up for faster economic growth and development. We call this window of opportunity the demographic dividend. And it is estimated to have contributed to as much as 1/3 of all economic growth in East Asia. How can sub-Saharan Africa capitalize on the demographic dividend? Well, an important first step is increasing access to and use of family planning so couples can choose the timing and spacing of their pregnancies. It also requires a decline in childbearing so there are fewer children to support with social services and more adults who can speed up economic growth. Improving the quantity and quality of education, especially for girls, is critical so young people can become a skilled labor force. Nations also need dynamic economic conditions to create employment opportunities for men and women. And finally, the demographic dividend is dependent on the right investments in young people so they are healthy, educated, and have access to jobs. For the nations of sub-Saharan Africa, the window of opportunity to experience this demographic dividend may emerge in the future. But we cannot get there without our young people. Learning from the East Asian experience, investments in policies and programs that harness the potential of young people are necessary for national development today and tomorrow. One critical area of investment is young people's sexual and reproductive health. Research shows that these investments protect the well-being of young people, maximize the potential for healthy, productive lives, and improve social and economic development. Although reproductive health is a lifetime concern for both men and women, it is especially important for young people because they are experiencing a time of transition that is full of challenges and important choices. But with the right investments, nations can help young people make a successful journey through this critical period. The right investments will keep young people, especially our girls, in school, help young people start a productive working life by giving them the information and skills they need to get a job. The right investments will prepare young people for their responsibilities as citizens and build more democratic societies. They will increase the age of marriage and encourage healthy relationships between men and women. And by increasing young people's access to family planning, they can delay childbearing until they're ready and make decisions together about the timing and spacing of pregnancies and number of children they have. Right investments will promote good health during this phase of life and support young people's transition into adulthood. How do investments in sexual and reproductive health help? Well, we know comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education empowers young people to make healthy choices about their behavior. Global evidence shows that these programs help young people abstain from or delay sex, reduce the frequency of unprotected sex and the number of sexual partners, which helps reduce the spread of HIV. Comprehensive sex education increases the use of contraception to prevent unintended pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections. And it helps delay that first birth to ensure a healthier mother and a safer pregnancy. In addition to education, access to youth-friendly health services helps young people address a range of reproductive health needs. What makes services youth-friendly? Well, they're available, accessible, and affordable so that young people are likely to use these services. They're acceptable to youth with all staff trained to provide services with respect, privacy, and confidentiality. And they are appropriate and effective with the necessary skills, supplies, and equipment to meet young people's reproductive health needs, such as their need for contraception, which remains tremendously high across sub-Saharan Africa. Among married adolescent girls, 67%, or about 2 out of every 3 girls, have an unmet need for family planning, meaning the couple does not want to get pregnant but is not using any form of contraception. And among sexually active unmarried young women, almost half are not using any contraceptive method but do not want to get pregnant. Fulfilling this unmet need for family planning could reduce the high number of unintended adolescent pregnancies that occur every year. And it will also help reduce the number of maternal deaths in sub-Saharan Africa, although adolescence is considered the healthiest time in a person's life. Pregnancy and childbirth are the leading cause of death for girls under age 18. The risk of death and disability is aggravated by unsafe abortion. Today, 1 of every 4 unsafely performed abortions in sub-Saharan Africa happens to an adolescent girl, the highest proportion of any region in the world. So increasing access to family planning is a key strategy to protect young women's health. But what about our adolescent boys and young men? They too need information and services so they can be partners in preventing unintended pregnancies and reducing the spread of HIV. The good news is condom use is increasing among adolescent males in some countries across sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at data from demographic and health surveys from 2002 and 2005, we see that the proportion of 15 to 19-year-old males who said they used a condom the last time they had sex with someone who was not their partner or was not living with them was 41% in Kenya, 36% in Malawi, and 33% in Zambia. However, more recent data show an increase in condom use among males in just a 5-year period, ranging from as high as 55% in Kenya to 42% in Zambia. This increase is quite remarkable, but we can do even more. Like addressing the factors that influence sexual and reproductive health behavior early in life. Risk factors are those that increase the likelihood of a behavior that usually has negative outcomes, while a protective factor is any factor that reduces the impact of a negative behavior or promotes a healthy alternative. There are many risk factors that increase a young person's chance for poorer reproductive health outcomes, like discrimination and inequality, especially among vulnerable populations like poor and out-of-school youth, very young adolescents, or youth living with HIV. A negative peer culture in which adolescent girls are pressured to accept risky sexual behavior and young men are encouraged to take sexual risks. And harmful practices like early marriage or sexual and physical violence. Even though some risk factors may always be present in a young person's life, adults, communities, and young people can work together to nurture protective factors, like teaching life skills to young people so they can resist peer pressure, communicate with their partner, and use contraception. Opportunities for youth participation like service learning, school, and sports, which promote positive relationships with peers. And supportive adults and communities. Close relationships with parents and other adults and being connected with the community are associated with improved sexual and reproductive health. Ultimately, we want the protective factors to outweigh the risk factors so young people can stay healthy and take advantage of education and employment opportunities throughout their lives. Now, in addition to improving the well-being of young people, investments in sexual and reproductive health lead to substantial gains in social and economic development. First, they increase returns on all our development investments, including health, economic growth, and education. For example, delaying marriage and childbearing among adolescent girls could help increase school enrollment by 20% across the continent. And the more educated a girl is, the more likely she is to use contraception and avoid unintended pregnancy. Young people's reproductive health is also closely linked with economic empowerment. In fact, data show that reducing adolescent pregnancy can help increase income at the individual, community, and national level. Turning to our trend graph, we're going to look at the relationship between the adolescent fertility rate and gross national income in Ghana. On the left axis, we have the adolescent fertility rate, meaning the number of births per 1,000 girls ages 15 to 19 years. The number ranges from 0 to 130 births. On the bottom axis, we have the gross national income per person, or GNI. This is in US dollars and it is standardized for what a dollar can buy today in the country. GNI may be higher than GDP because it also accounts for income received from outside the country. On this bottom axis, we go from $0 to about $1,600. This dark blue bubble here is Ghana. And in 1988, Ghana had an adolescent fertility rate of 125 births per 1,000 adolescent girls and a GNI per capita of $560. So let's play this forward and see what happens over time. We can see Ghana is moving toward that bottom right corner, with fewer births among adolescent girls and gross national income per person increasing as time passes. And by 2008, Ghana's adolescent fertility rate is now 66 births per 1,000 adolescent girls, compared to 125 births in 1988, and the GNI per capita is more than $1,400. What made this change possible? Ghana developed an adolescent reproductive health policy to provide guidance for government agencies and set benchmarks for youth well-being. The country also offered comprehensive reproductive health services for youth through media campaigns and peer education, and provided services in both school and informal settings. Ghana encouraged young people to participate in regional and district-level meetings, recognizing that young people have an important role to play in decision-making processes. Reducing adolescent childbearing is possible, as Ghana has shown us. And beyond improving individual incomes, it could greatly increase the national gross domestic product. For instance, if in Kenya all 1.6 million adolescent girls completed secondary school, and the 220,000 adolescent mothers were employed, together this could add $3.4 billion to Kenya's gross national income every year. Investments in sexual and reproductive health will ensure our 280 million young people will become 280 million opportunities for sub-Saharan Africa. But only if policies and programs are in place to protect their health and enhance their opportunities. And so our efforts should start with increasing funding and support for adolescent and youth sexual and reproductive health. Policymakers must establish and implement policies and legislation that help young people live healthier, more productive lives. Community leaders should speak out about the importance of protecting the health and well-being of young people. Parents, teachers, communities, and faith-based organizations must be actively involved to create a supportive environment and end harmful practices such as early marriage and violence. All sectors, including health, education, youth, gender, labor, planning and finance, should ensure the availability of reproductive health information and services to prepare young people for the transition into adulthood. And finally, leaders at all levels should involve young people in the design, implementation, and evaluation of policies and programs. Experience from countries like Ghana show us that our investments are most effective when young people are included as stakeholders in decisions that affect them. If the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. Just like a tree, our young people go through many transitions as they mature from young adolescents to full-grown adults. Investing in their sexual and reproductive health will enable them to stay healthy so they can grow, branch out, and flower. With the right policies and programs to protect our young people, we can ensure they lead successful lives and advance social and economic development.
So let's take a few minutes to reflect on the links between the key messages from that presentation and the theme of the ICFP, which is full access, full choice. So please type your ideas into the questions pane now. What does the presentation have to say about access and choice? What does full access, full choice mean for young people? To get us started and give you time to type in some thoughts of your own, I'll give an example that jumped out for me, which is access to sexual and reproductive health services, including family planning. One of the points that the presentation makes is that for young people to truly be able to access those services, they need to be youth-friendly and take the needs and situations of young people into account. It's not enough for young people to simply know that there's a family planning clinic in the area. The clinic also needs to have staff trained to work with young people, information and educational materials appropriate for young people, hours that young people are able to visit, things like that. And that's what we call youth-friendly health services. So I'm pulling up the questions here. Yeah, somebody says access to a broad range of family planning methods. And that's an excellent point, because when we talk about family planning methods, we mean everything from, short-term methods such as birth control pills to long-acting methods such as implants. And ensuring that people have access to that full range means that the individual needs of each person, and depending on where they are in their life, can be met. We might not think about all of the full range for young people, but they really need to have that full choice to find the method that's right for them. So somebody else points out comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education. I like that. That's because one way to think of full choice is to think of informed choice. So this means making sure that individuals have all the information they need to be able to make a fully informed and voluntary decision about their behavior. This is especially important for young people. Ensuring that they have access to comprehensive information is really key to helping them protect their own reproductive health. Yeah, somebody else mentions again that services need to be acceptable and accessible, youth-friendly health services. Yeah, and somebody else says, one of the key messages I got was that despite the fact that some risk factors cannot be completely eliminated, we can find ways to mitigate those risk factors by providing comprehensive information about SRH. And again, that gets back to that comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education. That is ensuring that young people have all the information they need to make their choice can help mitigate any risk factors that may otherwise be present in their life. That's a great example. And one more that someone has pointed out is that boys and young men should also be considered. So when we think of sexual and reproductive health, especially family planning, we often think only of girls and women. But as the presentation notes, boys and men also have sexual and reproductive health needs, and they can play an important role in improving the sexual and reproductive health of their female partners. So yeah, a part of full access, full choice, is including boys and men. Yeah, I like somebody, and this will be the last one I take for now, somebody points out, getting back to our point about access to a full range of contraceptive methods, someone says that information offered to young people needs to go beyond condoms and pills and include long-acting reversible family planning methods. And that's true. I think we often don't think about that for young people, but that might be the method that's right for them at that time in their life. So yeah, these are really great examples of how those messages and messages about youth sexual and reproductive health link to the theme of the ICFP. Making these connections is important to ensure that young people and their needs are adequately represented at the conference and considered within the larger discussion about family planning access that happens at the conference and afterwards. So let's put all of this into the context of policy change. As I mentioned before, the goals of the presentation are to engage high-level leaders and other decision makers in dialogue, raise the profile of youth and their issues, increase understanding of young people's needs, and encourage appropriate action. So how does the presentation link to that model of policy change that we discussed in the first webinar? And how can we use this and other engaged presentations and other policy advocacy tools to help bring about that window of opportunity for policy change? As we go through this, please give some thought to how you might use this presentation to complement your work or advocate for your particular issue. What aspect of your policy change efforts could it support? So first we have agenda setting, that ongoing competition among proponents of a set of issues to gain the attention of policymakers. In the first webinar, we discussed the characteristics that increase the likelihood of getting an issue onto the agenda: clear data, feasible solutions, policy champions, and focusing events. Data serves as evidence of the problem, and when it's presented well, it can shed light and focus attention on issues that might otherwise be hidden. One of the main purposes of this presentation was to take complex data from a variety of sources on young people's realities and needs, and to use it to build a case for investing in youth by presenting it using a variety of visuals and other innovative approaches. So for example, we show that young people make up a significant portion of the population. The comprehensive sex ed can reduce the spread of HIV. that many women have young women have an unmet need for contraception, and that keeping young women in school can result in higher GNI, among other points. The presentation not only highlights issues that need to be addressed, it also describes solutions and strategies that have been shown to be effective. The Trendializer scenario, showing the adolescent fertility rate and GNI in Ghana, is an excellent example of this. We're showing very technical data in a clear and interesting way through the Trendializer graph, and then highlighting strategies that have worked for Ghana and that other policymakers could implement in their own countries. Remember, it's important not only to convince decision makers that a problem exists, but also that there are feasible solutions so that they will be encouraged to bring about change. We also seek out opportunities to distribute these presentations through key persons, especially potential or existing policy champions, and through events to maximize the reach and effectiveness of the presentation as a tool. So for example, another of the PRB Engage presentations, called Harnessing the Demographic Dividend, is going to be shown during a session of the high-level ministerial meeting ahead of the ICFP. This is a focusing event and also an opportunity to connect with potential policy champions for that issue. Finally, our goal in developing these presentations is to make them engaging with compelling messages. As we've discussed, there are many issues competing for a position on policymakers' agendas. Catching and holding a policymaker's attention requires creativity and innovation. So catching the attention of policymakers and getting on the agenda is critical, but it's just one component. You want to increase their knowledge and understanding of your issue through policy learning. In this case, we want policymakers to understand the unique needs of young people, the challenges they face, the assets they bring, and the support they need. And as with agenda setting, compelling data and messages play a key role here. It's important to package the information you want to get across in an accessible way. Again, this doesn't just mean that the policymaker knows where to find the information, but also that the information is understandable in non-technical language and with compelling messages. An example of this is the section of the presentation describing, using data, how investments in youth, sexual, and reproductive health can result in benefits at the individual and the national level. We make a clear argument for why policymakers from all sectors should be concerned with and take action on youth, sexual, and reproductive health. Finally, although our primary audience for these presentations is high-level policymakers, we target decision makers at multiple levels, since important changes can happen at different levels. And remember that policy learning isn't a one-time event, but rather something that happens through exposure to information through multiple channels and at multiple points of time. So this presentation represents one tool for policy learning, and perhaps some policymakers will see it multiple times, but it will be more effective if accompanied by other policy learning materials and activities. Let's turn finally to coalition building. When developing these presentations, PRB seeks input and guidance from a task force made up of policymakers, researchers, and other experts and stakeholders. We may look to existing coalitions to be involved in the development of the presentation, or a new coalition may emerge from the group of individuals and organizations that were involved. From your perspective, the presentation is a tool that you can use to reach out to and share with other groups or individuals as part of your coalition building efforts. So I've outlined some of the ways that this presentation can support policy change, and I noted that we try to share the presentation with partners and others whenever we can. That includes all of you guys. So can you think of opportunities that you could use this presentation to support your own work? Again, use the questions box on your webinar to type in some ideas. I'll read a few out loud, and then I'll show you how you could give this presentation yourself, and I'll go over the materials that are available if you wish to use the presentation. To give you a moment to type in some ideas, I'll throw out an example. You might use the presentation with a group of regional policymakers to demonstrate the link between keeping girls in school and reducing unintended pregnancies. Another possibility, thinking beyond, remembering that our audiences go beyond just policymakers, is to think about media and the possibility of hosting an event for media and journalists to raise their awareness of youth, sexual, and reproductive health and rights, give them more information on that topic, and show the video as part of that. So someone else has typed in, I could use the video to provide background on youth sexual and reproductive health in general before I give a presentation on a specific aspect. For example, I could show the video and then give a presentation that talks in more depth about condom use in my country. That is a great example. I want to make the point that though this presentation, talks about data for sub-Saharan Africa generally and then gives a few country examples, you can also use it to support efforts that are specific to, your in-country work and add that around the presentation itself. So I'll also mention that I had mentioned the task forces before. PRB developed an engaged presentation for Malawi looking at population growth and family planning in Malawi. And the task force that was involved with the development of that presentation arranged to have it broadcast on national television as part of World Population Day activities. So that is, you may not have the resources to get it shown on national television, but linking it to events that you're involved, linking it to, World Population Day, International Day of Young People, those sorts of things present an opportunity that you can use this presentation and link to other activities that you're doing. So those are just some examples of how you can use the presentation to support your own policy change efforts. To wrap up today's webinar, I'm going to briefly go over the technical aspects of this and other engaged presentations and the materials we have to help you use them if you're interested. The presentation you saw earlier was the narrated video of The Time Is Now, Invest in Sexual and Reproductive Health for Young People. This version is an MP4 file format, which should play on most computer media players. The file is 341 megabytes, so it is a large file, and if you have poor internet connection, it might take you some time to download the file. The other format is the clickable presentation that you can deliver live. This is in Flash, and it's a 44 megabyte file. This file functions somewhat similarly to a PowerPoint in that you can use the forward arrow on your computer to advance one slide at a time as you deliver the presentation. The user guide includes the complete script for the presentation. So between the user guide and the presentation file, you've got everything you need to give this presentation yourself. I want to note that the presentation in either format differs from PowerPoint in that you are not able to edit or modify the presentation itself. You won't be able to add or remove slides, and you won't be able to change the content of each slide. If you do decide to give the presentation live using the script, however, we encourage you to adapt the script to use language that you're comfortable with or to include examples from your own country. So both presentation files and all of the materials I'll show you now can be downloaded from our website at that link below. So what you see here is our standard Engage user guide, which includes instructions relevant to all of PRB's Engage presentations. That includes an explanation of the technology and file formats we're using, and instructions on how to set up both the narrated video presentation and the clickable presentation. It also includes overall guidance on delivering effective presentations and on being a good presenter. This is the user guide for The Time Is Now. It's separate from the standard Engage user guide, and it contains information you would need specific to the content of this presentation. In this user guide, we describe the presentation goals, the intended audiences and potential uses. We also include the script for the presentation, a handout with key messages and presentation visuals, questions for discussion with the audience, and frequently asked questions, also a full set of references for data used in the presentation, and a list of additional resources you may want to consult to learn more about the issues and research raised in the presentation. Finally, I want to mention PRB's Engage Snapshots. In addition to our Engage presentation series, we have a series of 2 to 4 minute multimedia videos that we call Engage Snapshots. These are available on PRB's website as narrated videos, and they're much shorter and more focused than these larger presentations. We currently have snapshots that cover things like risk and protective factors for youth, unmet need for family planning, early marriage, and other topics. These short videos can be downloaded in the same way as the full presentation and can be easily embedded to play as videos within a PowerPoint presentation. So that makes them effective tools for enhancing your own presentations, especially if you feel like the full The Time Is Now presentation isn't the right choice for a given audience or an opportunity. Since these snapshots are so short, they're also smaller files, which makes them a bit easier to download and stream. All right, so we have gone over quite a lot of material today. I'm going to take a moment to sum it up before we move on to questions. You can go ahead and start typing in any questions that you have now, and we'll get to them in just a moment. So first, we discussed the links between the key messages from The Time Is Now, Invest in Sexual and Reproductive Health for Young People, and the theme of the 2013 ICFP, Full Access, Full Choice. And we looked at how this presentation, as an example of a policy advocacy tool, could be used to support key elements of policy change and policy change efforts. Finally, we reviewed the technical considerations and support materials that are available to help you use this presentation in your own work. The Time Is Now, Invest in Sexual and Reproductive Health for Young People is a multimedia advocacy tool that we hope you will be able to use in your work to help high-level leaders and decision makers at all levels understand the unique needs of youth and the importance of investing in youth for national development. I am thrilled that there is such a vibrant community of youth activists and allies, and I hope that this can be used to support your work. So we do have time for a few more questions. If you have questions about anything we covered today, please type them into the questions box of your webinar toolbar. I'll do my best to respond to all the questions if I'm not able to get to them all today, or if questions occur to you after the webinar, please send them in, and as with the last webinar, I'll send out responses to any unanswered question after today's sessions. So somebody is asking about links to these materials, and yes, again, this webinar has been recorded and we'll post it online. We'll also send out the links to the materials to our website in a follow-up email to you all. Oh, and somebody is saying, oh, great. Somebody is pointing out an example. They said they have used the Malawi Engage video with district and national stakeholders, traditional leaders, to include youth activities as a priority in district implementation plans. That is, I'm so happy to hear that feedback, and that's a really great example of using a policy advocacy tool and using one of these presentations at different levels. So we often think of the national level, but a lot of decisions that matter and that are going to affect the quality of young people's lives are made at a lower level. In Malawi's case, that might be at the district level with the district implementation plans. So using this with people who make decisions at that level is really key. Thanks so much for that example. And somebody else is making the point that it's really important to show the political will to pursue family planning projects, because some people, parents for example, may not have formal education, and they may want to pursue family planning, but if there's no political will to carry it out, then it's not going to happen. So people on the ground may want these things, but we do also need that political will at higher levels. Funding is important, and it is always a tricky issue. You know, we talk often about policy champions and whatnot, and sometimes it boils down to really trying to get, you know, funding, whether it's from the government, whether it's from external donors, on board for your project. And policy advocacy tools can come in handy for that too, you know, to motivate people to feel not only like this is an important issue to fund, but also that it's something that can be funded effectively. Okay, so I think that is all the questions we've got for now. I wanted to thank you again for joining us and for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. Again, it was recorded, and I'll follow up with you in a few days to provide a link, along with links to the materials and resources we covered today. If you do use The Time Is Now or any of our other Engage presentations or materials, we would love to hear about it. So please feel free to email me at kgilles@prb.org. Please also feel free to send in examples of your ideas for policy advocacy at the conference or after the conference. We especially want to hear from youth activists, you know, what you guys take away from these webinars and how you're using them. And also, if there's anything that you wanted more information about, please let us know about that too. We're always seeking to improve these materials. So before we end, I'd like to thank my colleagues Taijen Tsai, Angela Farmer, and Marissa Yaki for their help developing and producing these webinars. They were a tremendous support.